So I thought it would be useful to give my story about where I've come from, so that anyone who watches might have some understanding about where my views are coming from and how they've changed over time. I'm from New Zealand to start with. I was raised in a Christian household, so both my parents were Christian right from before I was born. Raised us with, I guess, Judeo-Christian values, and so that was very much formative of my worldview growing up. And I guess you would say they were fairly radical in their beliefs, and that they believed that that they were called to be, lights in the world, so to speak. And they taught us those sorts of values as well. So just as an example, we went as children with my parents over to India for like 6 months as missionaries. And, later in life, I've been back over to India on a missions trip as well. So that was sort of, kind of baked into my thinking. Went to a Catholic school, which was kind of weird because my parents were not super into Catholicism, but obviously they just were concerned about maybe like the secularization of education and wanted to make sure we had, a good Christian foundation. So that was sort of where my, I guess, kind of like, that sort of formative stuff came from. I stopped being a Christian for a little while once I kind of hit my early teens. Wasn't practicing or church attending for a few years there, and then in my late teens became a Christian again. I can't remember the phrase we used to use, but I committed my life to Christ, so to speak. So that was I made a personal commitment. It wasn't my parents' faith anymore. It was my faith. So did that at, about 17. And then from that point on, for the next about 10 years or so, was just really full on into church. So used to go to church, 4 times a Sunday and, multiple times during the week, prayer meetings and, all sorts of stuff. So, did ministry training schools and, learned all about, demon possession and, all that stuff. And initially went to kind of, I guess you would kind of like call it like a mainstream evangelical church. So it was one of the bigger churches in our city at the time. I think it may have even been the biggest church in our city at the time. And then my family had all moved to like quite what you would call like a full-blown Pentecostal charismatic church, speaking in tongues and miracles and, flag waving and carrying on. So, all good stuff for me at the time. Like, I won't lie and say that I didn't value that, and I do still value that. It did teach me some really valuable things, and in hindsight, lots of the stuff that I now kind of am aware of in terms of spirituality and in terms of human cognition and the way that we have religious experiences and things like that, that really informed it gave me a lot of those experiences because it was such a like, what's the word? It was such like a demonstrative type space. So everyone was, dancing and singing and raising hands and looking for the acts of the Spirit and all those sorts of things. So that was all tied in there. I was probably early 20s. I went away into a parachurch organization who were very much about creating sort of like a military style evangelical space, kind of pseudo Salvation Army-ish, like very much kind of influenced by the kind of some of the ideas of the early Salvation Army Church. And so, did a 6 months training there, and then a year at a kind of like an affiliated church down elsewhere in the country as sort of an intern. So, and that was kind of useful in terms of, like I had been so heavily involved in my church, and the church itself very close to being a cult, very, very close to being a cult. Believed itself to be like God's, messenger to the city, and wanted, believed that the church, the city leaders were going to come to the church to, get answers for the world's problems, because only God has the answers. And so we were quite insular, and that kind of was hard to break out of, and friends I still go there and are still very much invested in it. So it was, again, like I look at the time that I spent at this sort of parachurch training school, and the time I spent away as an unpaid intern, and there's parts of it now that I see are really bad and really harmful, and I know that people have been hurt by that organisation. So it's really it's difficult, because it's like I appreciate what I learnt there, but I can also see the harm and stuff, and I appreciate that it got me out of the bubble that I was in, and it set me on a kind of a different trajectory. So after I finished up there, moved back to my sort of hometown, and didn't know what to do, decided to get into graphic design work. So studied for that, and met my future wife, who I'd met a few years before. She was a sister of my friend, and so we ended up going out, getting married, and getting involved in a vineyard church, which, again, a real blessing, taught me heaps, gave me a different taste of Christianity. So that was really beautiful and beneficial. And just kind of, again, it was a continuing transition away from, I guess, kind of like a real fundamentalist Christianity, and starting to move towards something more liberative, and more social justice oriented. So we were there for a couple of years, and then we got married, and then we decided we're going to have kids. So we wanted to move closer to her family. So we moved cities, and we changed churches to one that her family was involved in. And things were fine initially, and then some fallout happened, some kind of, problems, basically, which is kind of church in a way. But because we had young kids at the time, we just pulled right back. We got right out of church. We sort of tentatively tried to find where we might be able to fit in at other places, but there just wasn't anything that really worked for us, having two small kids, and just neither of us having the energy for it. And amongst all this, work-wise, I'd ended up losing my job once already, and that had been quite an interesting experience. And I noticed some sort of, well, in hindsight, I now see that there was some mental health stuff that was starting to come up for me, which I didn't have to deal with at the time because we didn't have kids. But then I lost my job again, and that really was the start of a real, I guess, mental health crisis for me. I didn't notice it initially, but after about a year of being a stay-at-home dad, and not being the right fit for me, I just had this full-on breakdown pretty much. And we separated. My wife and I separated for a while, which was again really it made the all the stuff that I'd been taught about being a Christian, about the way that if you you set yourself up. If you're obedient to God, if you do the things that you're supposed to do, He'll bless you. He'll increase you. He'll stretch out your tent pegs. He will, He will just bless you if you are faithful to Him. And then here I am, 10 years later, no church, dislocated from my family, and then my wife and I separated, and working what would arguably just be called like a dead-end job. And I just got to the point where I was like, do you know what? I just don't even think God exists. And if He does, like, whatever. I'm living in hell at the moment. It can't get any worse than this. So I'm just not going to believe anymore. And it was the weirdest sensation. I don't know. I remember feeling the sensation of release, of like, for all that time, all those years, even before I was a Christian, always having in the back of my mind these beliefs about heaven and hell, and that my actions had eternal consequences and all this stuff. And then it was just like, doesn't matter. Like, I can just be, and it's fine. And I don't have to justify anything to anybody. I can just be a person in the world, and if I drink too much, whatever. If I swear, doesn't matter. And so that was the start, I guess, of a deconstruction process for me, which has been really, really good, because it's like when you've had all this stuff like baked into you from childhood about how you're supposed to be and believe and do and all these sorts of things, to then go, yeah, that just doesn't matter. And then you can go, well, what is hell? What have I been told about hell, but what does the Bible actually say about hell? And what do people who study the Bible, who aren't invested in the structures and stuff of it, have to say about it? So, although to be fair, I should back up, before I started that deconstruction process, so my wife and I were separated for about a year, and eventually I kind of got through with some medication and stuff, got through some of the kind of the worst of the depression, and moved back in, and we kind of started to get things going again. And then I was having a conversation with my parents. So I was I was raised believing, I'm a child of the 80s, so believing that, America were the good guys and the USSR was the bad guys, and, we were on the side of the good and they were the bad. And that was something that I kind of did believe, really. Like, I really did believe the propaganda around that. So it was, I was having, but through this period, through this kind of coming out of a really full-on evangelical space, really full-on Pentecostal fundamentalist belief system, and moving towards something, not that, I developed a social justice, more of a social justice awareness. And this kind of like came around from like hundreds of different things, just reading articles about, universal basic income, things about the, research around the effects of poverty on kids, and research on alternative forms of punishment for criminality and things like that, and just starting to just having all of these kind of beliefs that I'd picked up over the years without really knowing about it, challenged, without it being like I wasn't pulling it all apart at one time. I was just having these little kind of bits. And I think that's probably indicative of a lot of deconstructionists, is that it's not just kind of one thing that flips the switch, is it tends to be like a whole bunch of little things over time. So I moved from being quite right-leaning in my politics, voting for our kind of centre-right party, to gradually moving across to our centre-left party, and then feeling like our centre-left party really wasn't representing me, and so moving further towards our kind of Green Party, and then having a conversation randomly with my parents one day, and my mother talking about, our current Prime Minister is a communist and a socialist, and, and I'm like, yeah, that doesn't really gel with anything that I know about politics. She's centre-left because this is a centre-left party. They're not going to, elect a full-blown communist leader. She may have socialist sympathies, sure, but that's just not how our politics in this country work. So then in an effort to debunk my mum, because my family is just very much like, we're all about the argument. We're all about proving ourselves right. It's this kind of apologetics mindset. This, you've got to have the right answer in the right season. There's that passage in the Bible about anytime someone has, that you have an answer for someone, whatever it is. And that applies to my parents. I'm not going to let them get away with it if that's what they taught me to do. So, so there I was, just started researching socialism and communism to try and understand what they were, and to prove that our Prime Minister wasn't one. And it was cool. It was good. It taught me some things initially, and then I just found this channel that's now called, it used to be called Marxist Paul, I think it's now just called Marxism Today. And he does this great series on Marxism 101, and just goes through and explains what it is, or maybe it's Communism 101, and just goes through and explains and talks it through and da-da-da. And I'm like, by the time I'd watched like 4 or 5 episodes of it, I'm like, yeah, I'm a communist now. Because it just fits. It fits all the beliefs I was given as a kid in terms of caring for your neighbor, looking after the poor and the oppressed and the orphans and the widows. I look at Acts 2 and the early church and just think that's exactly the sort of model that they were living, was primitive communism. So that just started me down a whole rabbit hole in that direction, of just learning communist theory, reading Marx and Engels and Lenin. I haven't read much of Mao yet, but I like some of the Maoist ideas. So I'm on board with all that, and just kind of building out some other kinds of things. So you get in that, and then you learn about people like Alexander Kollontai, and Lenin's wife Krupskaya, whose name I can't remember the first name, but and the way that they took the feminist movement of the late 1900s and early 2000s, or 19th century and early 20th century, and they took that and they implemented it in the Soviet Union. So that then started me down the path of feminism, and I'm like, read a bit, and all of a sudden, yep, I'm a feminist now. So there's that, and then and then you start learning about ecology and all those things, and now I'm an eco-Marxist, and so just starting to see how all this stuff is all integrated and connected and combined. And that it's all focused around liberation, and then reading stuff like Rosa Luxemburg's Socialism in the Church, and starting to see like a Marxist work their way through how does Christianity and socialism overlap, and how can they work together, and what's the distinctions and the differentiations, and is there any reason why one has to be opposed to the other, and then that led me on to things like liberation theology, which is really, in a way, my kind of take on it is it's just a synthesis between Marxist economics and Christian teaching, and then that gets into Black liberation theology and indigenous theology and all this other like beautiful stuff that's just, again, once you start to piece it all together, it starts to just sort of fill out, and all of a sudden my Christian faith is much richer, and much more, full. I and then I guess at that point, that's when I started going through some of the deconstruction stuff. So found a couple of really good podcasts. In The Shift, which is by Michael Frost, who's he's a theologian here in New Zealand, and it's all about basically just kind of coming out of evangelicalism, and because we've had big mega church problems here in New Zealand, just like in the United States and Australia and Europe, everywhere the evangelical church is self-destructing at the moment. So we're not exempt from that, and so it's been really interesting to be on the sidelines of that, because I got out of evangelicalism. I experienced like a little bit of it, like the parachurch organization I was involved with ended up becoming part of one of the bigger mega churches here in New Zealand, but I left just before that. And again, the really almost cult-like church I had been a part of growing up, I left before it kind of really got bad. So I had this sort of succession of not being kind of really immersed in toxic Christianity, but just seeing it from the sidelines and knowing it. So In The Shift was quite interesting listen. Reclaiming My Theology, which is another amazing podcast if you haven't listened to it. Again, where it's Brandy Miller from the States, and she just does this beautiful job of unpacking white supremacy and purity culture, and it's just taught me so much about the theology that I was given, and where it's come from, and the harmful ways in which it's formed and made me, and having to reclaim what I believe in a more positive light, and I'm just kind of working through all that stuff now and just continuing to unpack it, which is kind of good. It feels good, like it's good to be able to go, I don't have to believe things that are harmful. I don't have to believe in a God that is judging me for, things that I didn't have any control over, that Adam and Eve sitting and, falling in original sin for everybody isn't a thing. It's just not. And there is a whole nother thing there, which maybe I'll get into in another video, around my beliefs around sin and God and all that stuff. Not that I'm an expert on any of that at all, but I guess it's just my way of synthesizing all that stuff and starting to take it in and figure out ways to be able to live it in a real kind of honest way. So that's sort of my journey. I'm at the moment, just as I say, sort of figuring my way through things, unpacking. Well, I feel like I've kind of unpacked a lot of the kind of the anti-communism I was brought up with. That stuff's kind of like done and dusted now. And really just kind of tying off a lot of the loose ends around the faith stuff, fully LGBTQIA+ affirming these days, because I just understand that they are made in the image of God, that he doesn't make mistakes, and gender identity isn't a mistake. It's just God's plan, and it's his plan for the cishet ones like us, who are so hung up on what gender diversity might be. It's him speaking to us and going, I've got a better idea than you think. So lots of change, lots of progress, and and a real, I guess, like flourishing that I didn't understand before, where Christianity before was so much about good and bad and right and wrong and in and out. Now I'm just aware that it's so much more about everybody's welcome. I think it's the old what's his name? I can't remember. John Wimber. That's the one, founder of the Vineyard movement. everyone's welcome. Everyone gets to play, so to speak. So that's that realization, that widening of that truth, that there is no exclusion in the kingdom, that there's no slave, there's no free, there's no man, there's no woman, there's no Jew, there's no Gentile. We are all one. And an even broader understanding of that, where actually it's not that they don't exist, it's that those are not divisions, but that every person has a right, in whatever way, state or form they choose to be in the world, or they feel that they are in the world, that they can just be that thing in the kingdom of God, and he has made them that way, and he welcomes them, and so should we. So, and not only just welcome them, but affirm them. I think it's really important that actually, just because I don't participate in or have the same sort of attraction as a particular individual, or that I don't have a need to be able to live beyond the confines of society's expectations around gender, that's not sin. It's it's God doing his thing and asking us to be part of it. So yeah, anyway, so that's kind of me. That's where I come from. As far as, I guess, where I want to go with the channel, I guess I'm like, part of what I'm feeling is, like I think I said in the previous one, like I come across a lot of content online that is from the place that I once was. And some of it's mean, I feel like I need to respond to some of that because, I don't know, it's the internet and why not? And I've got a perspective, and I can speak into that change, going from this is God and the only way it can be, to, well, this is like the complete opposite of what I used to believe, but it's still God. In fact, it's more God than the exclusionary version that I might have believed before. And then I guess the other thing is just kind of documenting my journey more clearly, kind of trying to tease apart some of the other stuff, my understandings of capitalism and imperialism, and and how Christianity and communism are complementary and can inform and help one another. There's still, just today I read 2 different posts on Reddit about people asking, can you be a Christian and a socialist? And I'm like, didn't we sort this out 100 years ago? How are we still having this discussion? But we still are. And I guess it's maybe a reflection of the state of what I would call bourgeois Christianity, which cannot have well, it's happy for it to exist alongside capitalism, but it's not happy for communism and Christianity to coexist. It has to create this kind of dichotomy, or this tension between the two. And I understand from a communist point of view why people are reticent to engage with religion, but as I say, I think we should really have sorted this out by now, guys. So yeah. Anyway, I'll talk into that if I feel like I need to, or if I want to. But other than that, let's get into it, and I'll chuck some stuff up soon, and we'll just see where we can go. So thanks for listening. And if you have any questions or any thoughts or anything like that, just shout out. I'm happy to explain more of my thoughts, my ideas on how this stuff all works. I've already written a bunch of blog posts to people about what I believe. So I can always just copy and paste that stuff in if you guys want to hear some more. And we'll hopefully talk soon. All right, catch ya.